Hello, dear friends, and welcome to the Healers Podcast. If this content resonates, please hit subscribe or follow to support this independent content. And today we have a really exciting episode. We're getting into the psychology of addiction from the family side, how it doesn't just affect the person struggling, but reshapes everyone around them. And Amber Hollingsworth has spent over 20 years working with people in addiction and the families who love them. And she runs Hope for Families Recovery Center, and her YouTube channel has grown to over 800,000 subscribers, which tells you something about how many families are quietly searching for a different way forward. She's built her own method around early intervention, family communication, and what she calls the invisible intervention, which we're going to dive into, working on the family system to create conditions where change becomes possible before crisis forces it. So I'm really thrilled to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Yuli.
So I can't wait to dive into all of your wisdom. It's such a big topic. This subject just keeps coming up more and more in my world somehow. And I think there's just so much more awareness about, first of all, just the damages and the effects of addiction and alcohol and everything in between. But also, I think what you're doing is such an important work to acknowledge the people around that are suffering as well and how many parts of the society it's touching. It's not just the person itself. So I really applaud your work, and I would love for you to kind of just frame what you do and how you got to this place of recognizing the need.
Okay. Well, historically, I'm trained as a therapist. And so I've been working with people, teenagers and adults that struggle with addiction for a long time now. Like I've worked in inpatient settings, outpatient, I have a private practice. So I've seen it from all the different angles. And what's helpful about that is it helps me understand the thinking patterns, basically like the psychology of someone that has addiction. One of the things I caught on to very quickly is that there's always a villain in an addiction story. So the person with the addiction is really full of self pity and resentment. It's like the fuel for addiction. And it's usually it's aimed in a lot of places, but there's like a primary place. And that's usually the person closest to them, like their parent or their partner. You can't get to the addiction until you can get the villain thing resolved. Basically, it's like the people that talk to me aren't going to talk to me about anything about their addiction as long as their family members is playing the villain role. Now, they don't mean to play the villain role. They get sucked into that, but it happens. And it's all they'll want to talk to me about. So because of that, I started to make content for family members. So even though I see people with addiction, I make content for family members, helping them understand the psychology of what's going on, what to say and what not to say, how to get through to someone in denial, and that sort of thing.
That's an incredible story and makes so much sense. So, talk to us about the framework that you've developed, this idea that I find it pretty unique and innovative, recognizing the impact of the family members. How does that dynamics? You mentioned the villain. What else? Can you unpack some of those typical dynamics that are happening?
Yes. So there's this primary villain, and the villain is always just the person that sees the addiction. They have that front row seat, as I call it, and so they see the behind the scenes of this person, and they see what's really going on. And this is someone they love and they care about, and naturally, they want to help them, and they want to get this person to take this serious. And so they start all these various ways of trying to get this person to see how big this problem is. And that's what puts them in the villain role, is because, someone in denial, they don't want to see this issue. And so when you're trying to show it to them directly, they just get mad at you. And it serves as this like giant distraction from them having to deal with what's going on with them. And you get this giant power struggle that goes on. And so the family member's like, I know what's going on. They won't admit it. And so they get really bogged down in trying to find the evidence and all this stuff to present to this person, as if I show you the evidence, you're going to admit it, which doesn't even work. And then they come to the person trying to get the person to admit it. And then this person says, you're crazy, you're overreacting, or that's not mine, or some form of gaslighting. And then that makes the family member feel even more frustrated, and then they look for more evidence, and this whole cycle just continues and continues and gets nowhere. So the person with the addiction and then the villain in the story, the family member, what will happen is the addicted person will then start complaining to the people around them about this villain person. So, like the mother-in-law, the friends, and everything else, people outside of the family member start to view the family member as the problem, but they don't know that. It's just like this whole secret thing that's going on behind their back. And eventually, the family member starts reaching out to the people and saying, "Hey, so and so's got a problem. Can you talk to them?" And trying to sort of recruit them in on the mission. But what they don't know is that the person with the addiction, in a lot of cases, most, I would say, has already recruited these people. And so when you go to them as the family member, they don't take you serious. They're secretly blaming you. May not be secretly blaming you. They might be blaming you just outright, which is the case a lot of times. And so what happens to this family members, they feel completely alone and isolated. And it's like, I'm the only one that sees this. No one will take me seriously. The person won't admit it. The family, they're enabling it and they think it's me. And so you get this horrible dynamic that really just fuels addiction.
So it sounds like there's a lot of like shame and avoidance, some really deep like patterns and manipulation, right? I mean, it's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it sort of all stems from like defense mechanism. And so once we're able to untangle that family dynamic, we're usually able to get things moving on the right track pretty quickly from there. But we get nowhere as long as that dynamic is happening.
So do you feel like this is part of the dynamic that keeps the person in addiction where they are like stuck in their story, right? It's all of us telling stories to ourselves.
It is, and it's been made worse because when people try to confront you, you naturally get defensive. And this is just a human thing, right? So somebody could call you out on something that you did wrong, and you know you did it wrong, and you feel bad about it, but you're going to get defensive. Now, depending on your personality, you may or may not say it out loud, but in your head, you're going to get defensive. That's a natural human response. So everybody starts trying to get this person to see this problem. And every time they're saying something, this person is thinking and usually saying all the opposite things. Here's what they're saying. They're saying, "You're overreacting. You think everyone's an alcoholic just because your brother was. You're negative about everything. You're crazy. I don't drink half as much as all my friends." These are the things they're saying to you. And every time you get someone to think those thoughts and say those things, they're convincing themselves you are. So it's like helping to keep them in denial because their natural reaction is to give you evidence against what you're trying to say, and it's making denial worse.
I feel like it's because our natural logic always tells us, well, awareness is the first step. If you can help the other person become aware,
Yes.
you're going to want to change, right? So are you saying this logic has some flaws?
Well, I agree with that. Awareness is the first step. I'm saying this isn't the way to make them aware. This is the worst possible way to make them aware.
Obviously, without diving too deep into your framework, but what are some of the ways to break this dynamic?
The sort of general big picture of it is that what most families do is they try to protect the person from all of the outside real world consequences. Like they pay for the lawyers, they pay for summer school, they do all these things because they don't want this person to burn any permanent bridges or, have some kind of consequence that's like major life altering. So they fix all of that, right? Externally, they're fixing everything, but internally, they're very negative with this person. And so you can see how that creates denial. It's like, I'm fine. What you're talking about? My grades are fine, whatever, because externally things are being held together. Now, the family member knows that's only because of them. But what the addicted person sees, it's just more and more evidence that you're crazy and you're overreacting and they're not that bad or they don't have a problem. You have to reverse that. So, with my framework, you need to let all of the natural consequences that you possibly can fall. And a natural consequence is something that happened as a result of their addiction that you didn't have nothing to do with. Because a lot of families, Say, "Well, that's a consequence and it's a punishment." It has to be something not related to you. If you doled it out, it's a punishment in that person's mind and they won't learn from it. So anything that naturally happens, let that happen, and then you play the good guy inside the context of the relationship. This allows them to start seeing the truth so much faster.
So is that part of the invisible intervention method that you've developed?
Yes, that's sort of the big picture concept of what we're trying to do. We're trying to reverse that. Like, let the world be the villain and you be the good guy, because when you're the good guy and the person trusts you and they start talking to you, now you have the ability to influence them. Now they care what you think. Now they're going to talk to you about what's going on. And now you can lead their thinking in a direction that you want it to go, but you still have to do it sort of what I call through the side door, not the front door.
Hmm. So interesting. I mean, it definitely makes sense psychologically. I'm just thinking all the cases in my life where this could have been applicable and helpful. You mentioned some of the things that families do. Are there any other common mistakes that families do to people in addiction?
Well, a big thing that they do is they see the problem and they're constantly talking to this person about getting help. "You need to get help. You need to get help. You should go to treatment. I'm not gonna stay with you unless you get treatment," every kind of version of that. And if you're dealing with someone who doesn't think they have a problem and you're trying to talk to them about going to treatment, you're ruining what I call your credibility with the person. Like, they're just eye rolling you and dismissing you, and now everything you say is ridiculous to them. So this person doesn't even think they have a problem, and you're trying to get them to go to 6 months of treatment. Like, we're way off base here. We gotta put first things first.
Right.
Yeah.
So first is create awareness that is not through talking necessarily, but through allowing the universe to show the consequences. But eventually the conversation of getting help does come up, hopefully in a natural and supportive way, like you mentioned. What are kind of in that phase two, what some of the framework that you're using?
When a person does start to see it and feel it, if you've created a good, what I call credit score with the person, they trust you, they'll talk to you about it on some level. And eventually, something will happen out here, and they'll start saying things to you like, "I really got to cut it back," or "I really need to stop doing this," or "I need to take a break from this," or whatever. They'll give you what we call change talk. Some version of change talk is going to happen. And you want to encourage that. Now, when addicts and alcoholics change, they don't go from "I'm in denial" to "Oh my gosh, I have a problem. I need to quit everything forever and go to treatment and get a sponsor." That's not what happens. It's like there's layers of denial. Like, "I don't have a problem at all," to "I have a problem, but it's not that bad." To "I have a problem, but I can handle this myself." "I have a problem. I need to stop this one thing, but I can still do this other thing." It's what I call the bargaining stages. So when someone first starts to change, they're not gonna say, "I'm gonna stop drinking forever and be sober for the rest of my life." You have to let people work through the bargains, and they're gonna try everything. "I'm just gonna drink on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'm just gonna drink beer and not liquor. I'm just gonna smoke on the weekends. I'm just gonna do $500 worth of cocaine and not $1,000 worth of cocaine." They're gonna try all these, like, ways of keeping it in their life without letting it go completely, and instead of fighting them on it, if you'll sort of go with it, it'll go faster. There's no way to get there and skip these bargaining, but you can speed up it. So, yeah.
So interesting. And, at the end of the day, we're talking about habit changes, right? Which is like really most of my conversation turned to be about habit changes, everything we do. And holistic health, unlike, traditional or whatever you want to call it, Western medicine, we're really trying to fix the problem at the root, right? And that's not an easy path. And to me, it's a very interesting path to explore, both as a thinker and talker, but also with myself personally. We all have those battles, but I think it's just such a fascinating topic that so many different like modalities of holistic health and psychology approach with so many different perspectives, but it's really the hardest thing to do.
Right. And all the things that I'm talking about with you today, Yuli, apply to helping anyone in your life that needs to make a change. It could be your best girlfriend who's, in a toxic relationship. This is how to approach someone who's in a difficult situation and maybe isn't seeing something they need to see in their life. This is what you do across the board. I just use the example of addiction because that's what people come to me for.
That is such a good point. I can totally see some of those things applicable. I mean, how many times we have those people that, they come to you with their problem because they maybe trust you, and you can just totally see what they're missing. And it's such a, especially if you are a healer or a coach, right? Or anyone in this field, sometimes it's easy for us to see what people are maybe missing.
Right.
But it's really difficult to hold yourself from, offering that help and just kind of leading with that natural empathy and compassion, but sometimes doing more damage, right?
Well, yeah, because the truth of it is deep down inside, they see it on some level. They see a need to change. They don't want to acknowledge that out loud because they have a lot of ambivalence about it and they don't want to commit to one side or the other. And they definitely don't want to tell you because then that makes it real, and then they know they're going to be pushed to make certain choices they're not ready to make. But deep down inside, when we're engaging in a behavior that doesn't fit with our values or that's harming us in some way, we know it. It's in there. So when I say you can't come at it directly, instead of trying to push that information into someone, you got to look inside of them and find what they have already and pull it forward.
Interesting point. Since we mentioned some of those other modalities, what do you find that really works well as a complementary treatment or in any of those phases, right? Starting with awareness. Because I think a lot of times, even seeking help, even from, if we're gonna be very woo, from a psychic, right? Sometimes you find answers that you didn't expect, all the way to like acupuncture and more of a medical based modalities. Like, what do you see that is working well as a complementary process?
Well, I don't know what you would call this, but I will say that it's really strange because we view addiction as a biological problem. But the answer to addiction, pretty much no matter who you ask what their belief is about it, is almost always spiritual. And the reason is because it's not that bad people get addicted. It's that people that get addicted start to act badly. And what I mean by badly is against their own values and morals and identity. And so as the addiction goes on, their behavior gets further and further and further away from who they are in their heart or who they truly want to be. And so in order to fix that gap, you got to get the behaviors to match the person's value. And it seems crazy because 'cause we're like, "Oh, it's a brain disease." Well, then why are you fixing it like this? Because this is the fix that makes me not have to run to denial, that makes me not have to rationalize, that makes me, not need all these coping skills and self-medication. So it's that spiritual component that really has to come together for someone.
So, what do you see people do in terms of spiritual practices that has been really effective?
Well, for me, it's all about identifying someone's values and their identity, and what I tell the families is how they want other people to. Right? Like, do they see
So,
themselves as a good father? Do they see themselves as a good provider? What do they care about, right? And then once you start talking to this person about that, you want to positively reinforce any of that. That's what I do with. And and then as I'm doing that, I'm sort of subtly subconsciously sending them messages of you're going to beat this and I know that because and then I give them evidence of something I know they've done in their life because that makes them believe it because it's their evidence. Not just me saying, "You can do it," like cheerleadery vaguely or whatever. I'm saying, "Remember that time? This and this and this? That's what this is gonna be like." And so it starts to move them and get them excited about wanting something different because they think sobriety is gonna be horrible. Because when you're in active addiction, on the days you're sober, if there are any days, you're miserable. So you're thinking, "I don't even wanna live life like that." I mean, literally, that's what they're thinking, and so when you can get someone to see, "Actually, grass is a lot greener over here," then they start to get excited about it.
so do you find some of the physical and biological changes are still kind of helpful? I know we talked about the spiritual side and it's important, but at the end of the day, things like movement and breath work and just getting well physically. sometimes moves people out of it. So can you talk about the physicality of it and again if there's any practices and modalities that you find really successful?
Yeah, there is the brain chemistry part of healing because as addiction goes on, all that gets out of balance. And the things you can do to restore that faster would be things like physical movement. You're going to get all the right brain chemicals, connection with other people so you can get your serotonins and your oxytocins going, accomplishing things. These are things that heal the brain chemicals behind the spiritual component, if that makes sense, because it restores you to feeling better. And ultimately, we're trying to get you to a place where you like yourself. Because when you're in addiction, from the outside, it may look like, oh, you don't care about anything. You're just going to be high all the time or you're just partying. But really, they're miserable. It's terrible. Right. And so we're trying to get them to biologically and spiritually sort of move back to them. And so movement, connection, all those kind of things will just help you feel faster.
Incredible. What do you find some of the causes of relapse? Right? When someone gets to that place, all the brain chemicals are wiring properly. They're spiritually connected. Why do we see so much relapse?
Well, I would sort of break it into categories. Sometimes I wouldn't even call it a relapse when someone's still bargaining. So, like, people will do things like, I'm going to take 30 days off. And then, they make it 2 weeks and then they use or whatever. Or they have these periods of off and then on. I don't even know if I would call that a relapse because the person in their mind was eventually going back to using. So, I would say that's one category that's bargaining and not relapse. I would put that over there. Then you have what I call it'll be different this time category. So it's like they'll be doing really great for a while and then they'll convince themselves, I've been sober for 6 months, a year, whatever it is, it's not gonna hurt me to drink just one or, this won't hurt or I can smoke a little bit of weed because I never even liked weed. I never even had a problem with weed. And so it's like a bargain comes back basically. But when they do that, it's not like they're like, "Oh, it's on, like I'm gonna go head in." They convince themselves that they'll manage it differently. I call that the it'll be different. That's probably the majority of relapses. We convince ourselves somehow we're not gonna let it get like it got before. But trust me, it always gets like it got before, usually pretty quickly. And then there's like an impulsive kind of relapse, like when you're more vulnerable, like if you're stressed, if you're hungry, if you've used up all your willpower for the day and then you run into a certain trigger and then it's available. Like sometimes you just move into autopilot and there's not even a lot of thinking involved. Like I was dealing with somebody not too long ago who had a year and a half, maybe 2 years sober. And they were dealing with some life stresses, which were real or whatever, but it wasn't all that different. But for whatever reason, they were in a mood that day. They walked into a gas station and they thought, I'm going to buy one. And they did. And it was literally happened all in a matter of 15 seconds. Because I always ask, I'm like, was this a premeditated relapse? Like, had you been thinking about it a while? Had you been craving it? Were you planning it? Sometimes they're like, "Yeah, I had been really wanting to for 2 weeks," when I was holding out. Sometimes it's just that impulsive, before I know it, habit kind of move.
And in those cases, any advice for families or loved ones? Obviously, there's, again, we're going back to that cycle of disappointment and shame, right? Do we restart all the phases in that point?
Family can have a big impact on whether we start those phases. If you get really mad at this person and get really confrontive, you're going all the way back. You're gonna be back in the dance of the villain and the victim. You're going all the way back. You're gonna keep it going long. If you respond with empathy, see what happens is someone relapses and the family relapses too with them because they panic. Everybody's in a relapse now. And family relapses and they're coming at this person, see, I knew you didn't mean it, or this is going to blow up on you. They try to magnify it up thinking that it's going to make this person realize it faster. What I try to do is minimize it. I try to be like, dude, that was a blip. You've been sober for 18 months. I'm not giving you today, but we're going to give you tomorrow if you're sober. Like, it's a blip, it happened. I try to, like, minimize it down because it feels less scary and someone will get right back on the wagon. If you make it scary and you make it like you've ruined everything, that's it, all these consequences, then they're like, "F it," and then it's just full on.
Yeah. No, it's so incredible. So all of this wisdom, obviously, it sounds like it's really like experience, a real kind of like client case experience. Are there any cases that you can think of that was really something that maybe taught you something new, or was like an extreme example of what you're teaching?
Well, one of the concepts that we teach is connecting to people's identity, and so for a family member, this is easy because you already know them really well, and instead of saying something to your person like, "You're being a terrible father and a bad influence on the kids, and they see what you're doing." Wait until you find them doing it right, and you say, "I always respected how much you make time for family." You remind them of their values, which puts it in the forefront of their mind, and tomorrow, if they're not acting in accordance, they see that gap. So, an example of when something like that happened, I had a client who had a lot of defense mechanisms, and even with me, and I'm usually pretty able to get them down, but this guy was tough. And most of his defense mechanisms, I would say, are kind of like narcissistic, and it has to do with shame. And I think he felt embarrassed about having to see me because this was a important, smart guy, and he spent all of his time telling me how great he was. I mean, how much how he was the best in his field, how the people that worked under him loved him, his clients loved him. He would literally send me copies of emails he would get. Like he was like trying to prove his case to me or whatever. And I couldn't even get him to talk about the alcohol, which was the issue. I said, "Well, I know your wife made you come here. Why did she make you come here?" And he's like, "Well, she doesn't like my drinking or whatever." And then he immediately is like, "But this is ridiculous. I've missed 2 days of work in 20 years and she's wrong," the standard thing or whatever. And then I said, "Well, what does she not like about your drink? Because usually it's not the fact that you're drinking, it's like something that happens when you drink. Like, do you change? Like, what happens?" And he's like, "Well, I guess I can be a little mean when I'm drinking." I was like, "Okay." And then I said, "Gosh, of all the people I know, you are so kind and so generous. You work so hard to treat everybody so well. That's probably really hard for you because that's not who you are at all." And immediately you can see the lights come on in his head. And he's like, and now I've got him just that little bitty statement does so much. It's a positive reinforcement. It makes him feel connected to me because it makes him feel seen, like really seen. And it starts opening his eyes of this gap between who he is, his values, and what he's doing. And that gap, that cognitive dissonance, is what will create the desire to change.
Such a beautiful, powerful example. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, sometimes just a little tiny noticing statement like that will just shift someone's thinking. They may not stop immediately, but the change process will start.
Incredible. So I have to ask you, as a therapist and somebody who deeply obviously works with clients and I assume groups as well, when was the moment that you kind of decided to share all this wisdom with others and the idea for your incredible YouTube channel came up? How was that transition?
Well, I would be in session talking about something, teaching something, whatever. And then people would all the time say, "Man, I wish I had that recorded," or "Can you write that down for me?" And at the time, it was about the time, YouTube was sort of popular. And I thought, well, I could just record that. And I thought, well, I'll just record it and I'll just share the link with my clients. And then that'll save me from having to give the brain talk, 400 times and then they'll have it or whatever. And so that's how it initially got started, was just from that.
Incredible. Well, I think you've accomplished also something that a lot of great practitioners have a challenge accomplishing is actually getting all your incredible wisdom out to people and also putting it out there in a very digestible format. I think that's one of the challenges that I'm seeing in the space. A lot of people hold so much wisdom, but it's really hard to communicate this wisdom.
It's helped me to make the content because when you do something every day, you don't think about the steps. You don't think about why you said what you said or why you asked. And it's forced me to have to like really dig in and understand my own process so that I could explain it, you know? And even still now, I'll see a dynamic happening. I'm like, oh yeah, I always do this, but you don't even think about it because you do it all the time. So it's so like they say, teaching is the best way to learn. And I think that's probably true.
That's a very good reason. Well, if we can also with this episode encourage other practitioners or coaches or therapists to share this wisdom, because I just find it so powerful. And everyone I interview, people like yourself who obviously have, this deep experience and also those examples, right? This is what really is all about, because I think there's so many beautiful theories out there, right?
Mhm.
We all know the theory. Everyone can go get a psychology book on addiction and
Right.
figure it out. But somehow, I think as humans, we learn best from stories, right? And we learn even more from examples that are very relatable. And I think that's really where the power is.
Yeah. Yeah, and having a framework, right? Because when people are in crisis, they don't really want a whole lot of how does that make you feel? They're like, "How do you think that makes me feel?" They're like, "What the heck do I do? That's what I'm coming to you for." And so people really want like concrete, like help me solve this problem.
Yes. I think we sometimes underestimate this like step by step approach. And it seems obvious to us, but it's so not obvious to many people who need this.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't obvious to me. It took me a long time to figure it out. And even once I had figured it out, I didn't realize what I was doing. So having to put it into, words and a system was, a whole nother challenge.
It's incredible. Yeah, such a great point. Well, Amber, it was just such a pleasure to chat with you. And again, thank you for sharing your incredible wisdom. I just before we wrap this up, is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners? Anything maybe we didn't touch on that was really important?
I would just want people to know if you're struggling with addiction or you have a loved one who is, don't listen to all those people who tell you all those terrible statistics. And don't listen to all this powerlessness. Like, I see people beat this thing every day, all the time, and there's a million ways to do it. So I think that hearing all that stuff just gets you down and it makes you not even want to try. And I would say it's not true and don't listen to it.
Beautiful, beautiful message. Well, thank you again for being here and for sharing your wisdom with us. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me spread my message.